Many parents today are understandably concerned about what their children may be learning or not learning in school. Curriculum battles have been waged in several states over what government-run schools should and shouldn't teach. And even some private schools have seen teachers and parents speak out against ideological bias in the classroom, which they say often occurs at the expense of academic rigor. A champion of individual liberty, limited government, and free markets, Connor Boyack has been instrumental in supporting parents who want to expose their children to the principles of a free society, principles that are frequently ignored or downright denounced in government-run schools. Connor is the creator of the Tuttle Twins children's book series, as well as many other books for children, teens, and adults. He is the president of Utah's Libertas Institute, which he founded in 2011. Connor joins us today to talk about the current state of American education, what parents can do to help balance the perspectives their children are being taught, and his newly released 240-page Tuttle Twins textbook on American history. Connor Boyack, welcome to the LiberatED podcast.
Carrie, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
I'm so glad you're here. You know, I've long been an admirer of your work and your writing. My children adore the Tuttle Twins books, and I have found them to be really an ideal way to expose my kids to some of the great thinkers and writers on liberty, law, and economics, including people like F.A. Hayek, Henry Hazlitt, Ayn Rand, Ludwig von Mises, Frederick Bastiat, and FEE founder Leonard Read. Your Tuttle Twins books have sold millions of copies. So why do you think parents gravitate to them?
Well, that's an interesting question that we've tried to figure out over the years. Elijah, who is my partner and illustrator in the Tuttle Twins books, when we did our first book, we had no vision for what it could become. It was just, as we discussed, we thought, we ought to do one for our kids. It would be a fun project. Maybe some other people would buy it. Clearly, there's been a lot of validation from the market of other families wanting this as well. So we've done surveys. We've, of course, talked to people at conferences and the like. And what we've found as the leading reason why kids are just resonating with these books, because we have so many parents who are like, my kids hate to read, but they'll read the Tuttle Twins books, or, they read a bunch of fluffy stuff, but man, they really get into your books. And the leading theory that we have from talking to these families is that our books are teaching, quote unquote, adult ideas to kids. And so what we're finding is that kids are sick of being treated like kids. They want to be treated like big kids. Every big kid wants to be treated like an adult. And when we give them literature and stories and materials that meet them at their age, we're kind of not belittling them, but we're not challenging them. We're not encouraging them to, rise bigger, which many of them want to do. And so I think the sweet sauce of what we're doing is a lot of these are very complex economic and political concepts. Yes, we're wrapping them in a fun story. Yes, we have fun little illustrations that Elijah does, but still these are like big ideas. And I guess it's working because kids are really clicking with them and they love, learning more than half of Congress knows. And 4 million books later, here we are.
Absolutely incredible. And so then America's History is your newest kind of Tuttle Twins type of book. It traces the main characters throughout this 240-page textbook, but it is your first textbook. You have a whole series of economics curriculum that families can purchase, but this is really, I think, your first foray into an actual textbook. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about why you decided to write that. Who is it for? What can families expect?
Yeah, thank you. I hesitate to call this a textbook. So for those watching the video, you can see this is America's History. It's hardback. It's 240 pages, full of illustrations. I always hesitate to use the word textbook just because it conjures images of those of us who went to government schools. You got your backpack with those thick books and you're like being weighted down and getting back problems at the age of 9 and having to read all these factoids and cram them in your head for the test. And that's the exact thing that we do wrong with history education. We teach kids superficially names and dates and battles and who did what and when, but it lacks context and it lacks relevance to their lives today. Why should a kid in 2022 care about what happened in 1770, whatever? We don't help them understand that. There's no contextual understanding. I didn't like history in part for that reason. I didn't like the pump and dump of having to learn who said what at which convention and which founding father did this. Like, I didn't like that. And I was kind of turned off to history for a long time as a result of that method of teaching. But history is amazing. And I didn't come to learn that until later in life. And it was through storytelling. It was by reading biographies and other history books that treated history as a narrative, because that's ultimately what all history is. And that's the power of history. For example, I was bullied when I was in high school. I was a late bloomer, so I was very short. And I can frame my own history. I can tell that narrative from a victimization standpoint, right? Those guys are jerks and I'm a victim and I need reparations, or, that's why my life isn't going as well as it should. It's because way back then I was being bullied. And I can guide my present actions through that framing of history. Or I can frame the exact same events differently. I can say, you know what, maybe those kids were being abused at home. Maybe they didn't know how to handle their emotions, right? Maybe I can be more compassionate for the underdog now as a result of what I went through then. And I can affect my present and future based on how I tell my own history. And that is what we can draw from American history as well. We can change the world for the better today and in the future by framing history a certain way. I believe history education has been intentionally dumbed down. I think that the elite thought control, whoever you want to talk about establishment, don't want us to learn from the mistakes of the past so that we as a society are willing to repeat them and empower these clowns even further to rule over us. And so history is presented in an entirely superficial manner, and young people are deprived from that opportunity to improve their present and their future by having this narrative of our past. Our book is aiming to correct that problem, to tell the ideas of the past that can be related to our world today, and to help young people say, okay, here's what we learned about from the past. What does it mean for me today? How can it affect my life and our world? That is what history education should be about. It should be about storytelling. It should be about improving our world today. And that's the whole basis for this new America's History book that Elijah and I have launched after, like 2.5 years of working on it.
Ah, congratulations on that. I know you have board books for toddlers. You have the Tuttle Twins books that really are great for kind of elementary school age children. What about this new textbook or America's History book? Is that kind of the same age group? You also have books for older teens. What is the age range for this new one?
Yeah, our children's books, we usually say like 5 to 11 is the sweet spot. This one, we've been saying about 7 to 13, in part because it's longer, it's going through a lot of information. So I think, some of the older kids will do better. What's really fun for me about the Tuttle Twins books is I'm often asked this question: what age is this for? What age is this for? And we often call these, instead of children's books, we call them family books, because what we inevitably find is older kids are reading them, even if it's beneath them in terms of the format and their age. The ideas are often fresh and new for them, and so they're willing to read them as well. And Carrie, I can't tell you how many parents, probably over half the parents, who get our books on the recommendation of a mom in their church group, or a peer in the their class or neighbor or whatever. So many of these parents have never encountered the authors that you mentioned earlier upon whose works our books are based. They've never read any of these economic ideas before, learned this history. And so all the time, the parents are like, oh my gosh, I learned so many things too, which is exciting for me, because your work, my work, fundamentally, we're trying to educate adults and voters and help people understand these things. Here we are through quote unquote kids books, helping a lot of these moms and dads who never would read economics in one lesson if we gave it to them, right? They'd never pick up Human Action by Ludwig von Mises, but now they can start to understand and incorporate those ideas too. So it's fun that, yes, we have certain age ranges, but fundamentally this is for us, it's like a family learning experience to really foster some debate and conversation in the home, and really increase the retention of these ideas. We can go into the classroom and have a 30-minute lesson, and then the kid goes home and forgets what they're learning, or we can empower the whole family to discuss these ideas over the dinner table and really deepen their awareness, familiarity, and then application of those ideas, which is really what we're after.
Absolutely. I know with the Tuttle Twins books, I would read them first to my children or reread them, as a family, and then they would inevitably gravitate to the books themselves and read them as they became more proficient readers. So definitely a family experience and lots of learning for everyone, parents included. So with your success with Tuttle Twins has also come criticism. And I'd love to spend a little bit of time talking about that. In April, CNN published an opinion piece stating that the quote, right-wing children's entertainment complex is upon us, end quote. And it singled out the Tuttle Twins as a case in point. That article caused the Tuttle Twins sales to soar, echoing a similar situation from the fall of 2020 when the progressive magazine Current Affairs posted a similar critique of Tuttle Twins that also caused sales to skyrocket. So, what do you think these hit pieces, or why do you think these hit pieces, rather than discouraging parents from looking into your books, do the exact opposite?
Well, you've written articles about both of these spike sales, so some amount of the attribution and credit goes to you. So thank you, Carrie. It's been fun in both cases because I think the default thing for a creator who's pouring heart and soul and energy into these projects, when someone is attacking what you're doing, it can be very easy to feel sad, depressed, angry, vengeful, whatever. And I have a background in marketing. And so I think that has led me to recognize that these are not situations in which I should feel angry. They rather are gifts to me, right? The whole adage of, bad news is good news, or, any news is good news type of thing. I think it's that way with these attacks as well. Clearly, there are rabid, CNN followers, socialists and the like, who never would buy our books, but maybe that individual, posts the CNN article on their Facebook page. Look at these horrible books. And then a dozen of their followers who are ideologically on the other side from them, family members or whatever, might say, oh, wait, what are these? And so the word gets out when CNN's supporters spread the books, spread the article. But most importantly, what it allows us is an opportunity to move people off of the fence. A lot of people, consumers in general, we see these Facebook ads all the time or whatever, and maybe after 6 or 7 or 8 touches, hearing an ad, hearing a friend mention a product or whatever, we finally are impelled to action. Okay, I'll go check this out. Okay, I'll get it and see what the fuss is all about. That's the way with the Tuttle Twins books. When we survey our customers, it takes them on average about 6 months to finally buy the books after they first heard of them. And so we're constantly trying to, get them to see an ad or get them to hear about it from a friend. So when an article comes along like the CNN's attack, this op-ed, we see that as an opportunity to galvanize a lot of people who are kind of in the squishy middle. Yeah, maybe one day I'll get the books. Yeah, I'll get around to it. It is a great motivational thing because so many of these people can't stand CNN or Current Affairs, the socialist magazine, and they're like, ugh, if my enemy is attacking this, then it must be really good. I should. And it really accelerates the adoption curve because these people are like, I don't want to be associated with CNN at all, so I better do the opposite of what they're saying and go get these books. And so a lot of these people who bought the books following the attacks on us had already heard about the books. They were inclined towards getting the books. Maybe they had the intention to one day do it, but it really just accelerated their purchase and their adoption of the books. So as I said, after CNN attacked us, is like, does anyone know anyone at MSNBC who'd be willing to pile on as well? It's just really good for business. And in fact, we're redesigning our website right now. And a lot of people, when they do websites, and we're going to do this too, they'll have what's called social proof. They'll put the logos of the news agencies that have covered their company or whatever, right? It's a way to show credibility and legitimacy. We're going to put anti-social proof. So prominently on our new homepage, it's going to say, the Tuttle Twins books as attacked by CNN, who called it, right-wing indoctrination, just as a further way to kind of show our audience, like, if you're against them, then you're probably for us. So come check these out. So we have fun with it. It's just kind of fun from a marketing standpoint to poke at your enemies and make a buck, but more importantly, get the books out and get the word out a lot more.
Great to see that these media hits end up causing these fence sitters, these parents who may have heard about Tuttle Twins but didn't take the leap to then go ahead and purchase them. I'm sure it also leads other families to discover Tuttle Twins for the first time and realize this is definitely a series they should have on their bookshelves, and again, sort of counterbalance what their children may be learning in their larger culture and in classrooms and so forth. So that is, really great to hear. I wonder what you think these places like CNN or Current Affairs, when they call Tuttle Twins, a right-wing entertainment complex, what do they find so threatening about the ideas in Tuttle Twins? I mean, we talk about, like I mentioned in the beginning of our episode, you're promoting ideas of individual liberty, limited government, free markets, kind of the foundations of American society. And yet what is so threatening to some of these critics?
Well, as Ron Paul always says, truth is treason in an empire of lies. And I can think of no more apt description of the society that is changing before our very eyes, and just accepting, falsehoods as virtues. And our books empower the individual, right? It's all about individual autonomy, personal responsibility, self-worth, hard work. And that is a threat to collectivists. They want to subordinate the individual. It's why I object so strenuously to government schools, the architects of which were ardently against individualism and wanted to, subject people to the collective and create cogs in a machine for the state. And so I think that is ultimately the threat. Entrepreneurship is a radical act these days. And people, you think of the story of Atlas Shrugged, right? How prescient so much of that has become in a world full of moochers who, like lobsters in a bucket, want to tear down anyone rising to the top and, eat the rich. So I think individualism is a threat. I think people who can boldly stand up and advocate for their own ideas and their own success is a threat to a class of envious moochers who, like Frederick Bastiat once said, right, government is the great fiction through which everyone endeavors to live at the expense of everyone else. The state cultivates this society where you have this codependency and mooching off of everyone as a way to get ahead. And then when you have these individualists who stand up and say, no, I'm going to make myself, I'm going to, bootstrap my own success. And granted, a lot of that I think is nuanced, despite believing in the virtue of selfishness, as Ayn Rand might say, or the importance of individualism. I think interdependence is critical, and having a society of voluntary support of one another is huge. But fundamentally, I think that it is collectivists are threatened by those who espouse individualism. And fundamentally, our books teach that virtue, albeit through things like the Golden Rule and the importance of entrepreneurship and sound money and free markets. At the end of the day, the fundamental worldview that the Tuttle Twins is advocating for is one of individual supremacy over the collective. And I think that is a threat to those who see individuals as kind of uncontrollable, chaotic, defiant of the authoritarian order. And so on that basis, I'm proud to say, yeah, it's great that they hate what we're doing, because I detest this kind of collectivist Borg-like mentality that they're trying to cultivate. And I think we need to do all we can to fight against it.
Well, and it seems like the message is getting through, because over the past couple of years of education disruption, we've seen this trend toward, at least in education, entrepreneurship, and societally as well. There's been an uptick in entrepreneurship in the US just after years of decline. So that's a good signal, a good sign that maybe this focus on individualism and autonomy and self-determination and innovation are really catching on. And, again, in education, families are fleeing government-run schools at record rates, continuing to do so even after schools reopened after prolonged school closures. So there are these signs of hope and optimism. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what you see as sort of the future of education, maybe some of the trends you're seeing in Utah or work that you're doing through Libertas to support education entrepreneurship.
Well, I think you used the word entrepreneurship, and I think it's spot on here, because what I think saw during COVID with all the Zoom schooling and forced adoption of universal homeschooling for a few weeks at least, really immersed a lot of people into alternatives. And once they got a taste of it, they started to say, well, wait a minute, maybe what I grew up, the system I grew up in, what I've always done with my kids, maybe there are alternatives. It's why homeschooling has largely tripled across the country. It's why I think we have a lot of success, West Virginia and Arizona and elsewhere, with school choice and education savings accounts. There's just a higher appetite than there was before for alternatives that recognize the diverse needs of different children. Any parent of more than one child knows that you have to parent and discipline and encourage and motivate them each differently. And I think the word has gotten out that, you know, we should no longer tolerate a school system that doesn't accommodate those differences, and that in fact there are structural, legal, financial systems out there that we can explore and adopt that can honor those differences. And so I think we've got certainly the micro schooling movement, which has been huge. I can't tell you how many teachers I've heard from who quit their profession to go on and start a micro school to say, now I don't have to deal with the bureaucracy and all this kind of stuff. I can teach 8 kids, make more money than I was before, control my schedule, you know, and be an entrepreneur. And there's so many people out there like that. So COVID has had a lot of dark clouds, but there's been certainly, I think, a silver lining in the sense that we've seen this adoption of education reform more quickly than we otherwise would. Carrie, what I think the future is going to bring is increased decentralization and individual preference. And what I mean by that is we're growing up in an app economy in which, you know, I want to be able to tap a button and have the exact meal I want, prepared the way I want it, arrive where I am when I want it to arrive. And there's no walking back from that, right? When you have that ability and that a customization to having things your way, I think that's going to spread through other areas of life. I think we're going to see that. We're certainly already seeing it with, you know, websites like OutSchool and others, where there's this a la carte opportunity to say, what do you want to learn? What are you curious about? Let's customize your educational journey just for you. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that. Certainly schools like Acton Academies and Prenda and others that allow for more autonomy and exploration and project-based learning. I just think that the trend is only going to increase, and I think COVID helped. So I'm optimistic. I'm kind of bullish when it comes to educational entrepreneurship, and I think the future is pretty bright when we consider, you know, the internet, the app economy, and all these things trickling out into how we parent and educate our children. I think there are even better things to come, and I'm excited for it.
I agree. I think that the future of learning is exciting. It'll be wonderful to see what possibilities have yet to be discovered and imagined and invented. And that's where encouraging education entrepreneurship, I think, is so crucial. So you mentioned school choice policies, such as Arizona recently passing universal school choice through their education savings account program there, kind of a first in the nation program. West Virginia also seeing some improvement there in terms of education choice, and overall record levels of taxpayer support for school choice policies that enable education funding to follow students instead of going directly to school districts. But I feel like another piece of that is removing barriers for education entrepreneurs, right? Entrepreneurs in all sectors often encounter, you know, government regulations or barriers to entry that prevent them from starting or scaling a business. And I know that that's something you've worked really closely with Libertas in terms of these regulatory sandboxes and some other programs to help spur entrepreneurship more generally. I wonder, you know, what you see in terms of education, because education, again, is so highly regulated. There's so many barriers to entry. What can we do at perhaps the state and local levels to reduce some of those hurdles for education entrepreneurs?
Well, we actually did something exciting this year. Before I share what that is, a quick primer for those who don't know this term, regulatory sandbox, or we call them opportunity sandboxes. A sandbox is like in the IT computer world, a sandbox is a testing environment in which you can launch your app or your code, and before real users are using it and you risk their money or their, you know, experience getting negative reviews if something's broken, you can test things out before you do a full launch. So a regulatory sandbox is a legal environment in which a company can say, hey, look, this law or that regulation actually prohibits what I'm trying to do. could I, for a year or two, be shielded from that law or regulation? In other words, not have to comply with it at all while I go demonstrate that this product or service, is good. So Uber or Lyft, rather than fighting all the taxis, what if they could have had a system in which it's like, hey, look, we know the taxi laws say that. Can we hit the pause button though on the enforcement of that and show that consumers are safe and everything is fine with this new model? And so there's tons of companies now across the country in these sandboxes, and Utah became the first state through our work to have what we call an all-inclusive regulatory sandbox. What that means is any industry, any business, any size, anyone can step up and say, hey, that law stands in my way. I want to do things a little bit different. Tesla, for heaven's sakes, when they came to Utah, my home state here, they had to go to the Supreme Court because it was illegal to sell their cars, because the car dealers had gotten the laws changed, as they have in other states, to say you have to sell cars through car dealerships rather than Tesla's direct model. So there's lots of innovative companies like this that run into these legal and regulatory problems. Well, what we did earlier this year is we got past the country's first education sandbox. And so now they're setting up the rulemaking and they're getting the law ready to the program to launch. But what it means is that if you're a teacher in a school here in Utah and you want to innovate, you want to do things differently than the top-down Common Core type of state standards and the bureaucratic whatever, you can basically get the consent of the governed. You go to the parents of your students. And I think it's like if 2/3 agree with your lesson plan or your vision for doing things differently, you, the teacher, can be unleashed from all of those bureaucratic restrictions and have increased autonomy and flexibility to create a classroom environment the way that you want. Some people, parents don't like it, they can pull the kid out, go to another class, whatever, but empowering teachers to do what they signed up for originally, not to be disciplinarians and pedagogical referees of, kids sitting in, at their desks and managing them, but to inspire, to do what John Taylor Gatto's vision always was, but what he struggled to do in New York schools for 30 years was to reform from within. And so the Education Sandbox now allows both parents and actually also entire schools to seek increased autonomy within the system and pioneer new, trends or techniques, or bring back old techniques of the basic, reading, writing, and arithmetic, and not have to do with all the other stuff. So it remains to be seen if we can, in fact, this is the open question, right, Carrie, where can we reform the system from within, or do we just need external competition from without? I think both are important. I think ESAs, private schools, all the rest are going to, push government schools to improve by having people leave and go to these alternatives. I think that's an important market-based incentive for the government schools to feel like they need to improve. But also there's this open question of whether they can be reformed from within, and whether you can have these pioneers of innovation within the system having the autonomy to do things a bit differently. They may run into a lot of problems still through peers and the teachers union and pressures and other things, but it's worth experimentation. And so Utah's now become the first state, and we're going to go help other states try to adopt an education sandbox as well.
Ah, great. Any way that we can reduce these regulations and inspire innovation, ideally outside of the system, but working within the system as well, I think can only expand options for parents, teachers, and learners. So great work there, not only on the policy and legislative front through Libertas, but also in your kind of direct impact with the Tuttle Twins consumers and readers of your other books. Connor, what is the best way for my listeners and viewers to connect with you, to learn more about Tuttle Twins, to buy the new America's History book? How can people find you?
Well, thank you, Carrie. All the Tuttle Twins books are at TuttleTwins.com. The new history one, we have a big launch bundle where we've got curriculum that goes with the book and an audiobook and other things. That's all at TuttleTwins.com/history. And then Libertas Institute is at libertas.org, and that's where you can find us.
Wonderful. Connor Boyack, thanks again for being on the LiberatED podcast.
Thank you, Carrie.